It's Todd Rogers, who's traveled a long way to be with us at the show. Todd, take it away.
How are we doing today? For those of us who don't know me, I'm Todd Rogers, the king of video games, or known as the first professional paid pro gamer. I got my start back in 1980 working for Activision. I opened up a brochure one day playing the old Atari, and I saw that little list in there that says, well, if you want recognition, break this score. I thought that was my perfect opportunity to make a name for myself. And in the duration of doing this, how do you know when you're a true gamer? When you have intruder alert for your ringtone. So basically what happened was Activision thrown like a little gauntlet out there for the public. Beat this score and make a name for yourself. And I thought that was my golden opportunity to really do that, make a name for myself. And I broke the record that was slated in the brochure. So over a period of time, I kept whittling my score down on the game Dragster, and so much so where they had to change the manual that they would sell to the people and the cartridge. And the time reflected my faster time up from 5.74 to a 5.64. Until one day at a gaming event or the Consumer Electronics Show where they had all the distributors, video games, and just anything electronics back then. It wasn't just video games, it was everything. They flew me out there to play the games and show off if I really was in fact the real deal. And this is one of the events that I had gone to and played against Bruce Jenner. And it was really funny how that partook. He didn't know that I was working for Activision, and he was showing me how to play decathlon. And it was really weird because he's showing me how to play it, and I have my own unique way of playing games that have, you know, when it deals with reflexes. Well, he held it conventionally between the thumb and the first finger, and of course, the whole idea with that game was is to swag your joystick back and forth as fast as you can to make the meter bar go across. Meter bar going a full way across meant how fast your character was going. Well, after watching how he played, and of course I do what's called a Spock move, I put the joystick between all four fingers and flick back and forth more rapidly. So I ended up beating Bruce Jenner at the decathlon, and he looks at me and goes, "Oh, you played this before?" I says, "No, you're showing me how to play." And then when later on he found out I worked for Activision, he thought it was really weird that he says, "Oh, it was ringed." I says, "No." I said, "Not actually." I says, "I've played games before. There's certain games that I gravitate towards more so than others." Like with the Dragster, it just was something that back then that's all we played. It's not like these days you have thousands of games to select from. You had very minimal, you know, like Pong, you had Breakout, Space Invaders, and stuff like that. So the video games was in its inception where they were just manufacturing different variations of games and different styles of games like mazes, shoot 'em up games, and reflex games. So it was quite fun. And the Activision people liked the idea that they were able to hire me to go to any specific events and showcase their product. And in doing so, that opened the door for me to work for 42 other software publishers. Yeah, absolutely. And what that happened was like what Sega and Nintendo and companies like that would negotiate deals. They would fly me to different areas and say, here's our game. Go play it, and you have the chance to play against a celebrity like Mike Tyson or Michael Jordan or Robert Culp, Barbie Benton, and people like Bruce Jenner as well. And a question that's always asked is, have you ever lost to a celebrity? I'm like, well, no. They're in my field right now. You know, this is something I specialize in. If you were to take me off and put me in, like say for instance, a basketball court to play against Michael Jordan, I would lose miserably because, you know, he played, that's his specialty, it's not mine. So again, it was quite fun, and of course, not every celebrity takes losing quite well. There are some that just didn't like the idea, or maybe they were embarrassed to lose in front of whole hosts of people, but you had to take the good with the bad. But that's basically how I got started as a child. I played a lot of the games like many of us did, and I liked the idea of, well, this is something that's really relevant. I never really stood out in school. I mean, I collected spiders, so people thought I was weird and really distanced themselves from me, but the video game has always been something that was special and something I can gravitate towards. Do we have any questions? So people ask, like this for example, they say, well, how do you prepare for an event? or a competition. They're extremely different. When you compare for, like say for instance, I want to play a Street Fighter game, you want to know what the button configuration is. Something along those lines of that's all you're going to be doing is specific button configuration to do certain kicks, certain ducks, certain punch moves like that. Or a racing game. Now a racing game is you got to know where to brake, how to accelerate, how to take a corner. So you have to look at the game specifically and prepare yourself mentally. What am I going to do here? Okay, if I'm going to go to a fighting game, you want to prepare for that fighting game. I was at an event last year, and I was gearing up for a game like Robotron or Geometry Wars, which is basically reflexes, how to evade and shoot, and basically patternistic. Well, a fighting game is sort of patternistic, but you're relying upon the intricacy of your opponent. They're not predictable like a machine is. A machine is programmed to do one thing, and if you're playing it enough times, you get to know the machine and how it functions. Whereas if you're doing a Street Fighter game, you're uniquely different because not every gamer plays the same. So you have to adapt to what your specialty is. Some people like shoot 'em up games, some people like maze games, and some people like reflective games, like Robotron, you know? I mean, it's not every game is the same with that. Most games don't last past 5 minutes on Robotron. But back to the competition, you know, I was gearing up for basically games that were more action geared style. And when I got to the event, they're like, well, we don't have any of the games that you selected. And I'm going, whoa, this is really going to be difficult to adapt to because now I don't know what I'm playing. And then when they lowered the boom on me, they're like, well, we have all fighting games. We have Street Fighter 4, we have Marvel vs. Capcom, Tekken. And I'm going, well, that's really not my style of gaming, but I have played and I've done pretty well at it. But again, with that mindset, you have to gear yourself for the fighting. I mean, there's prep work involved. If you're going to go against somebody that's really good, you want to learn or watch their videos of what their techniques are. Like Justin Wong, for example, watching him and his techniques. You know, he's a very, very good Street Fighter 4 competitor. And watching how he does, you get a feel for how people are going to respond and how they're going to react as an opponent. So there's a lot of prep work that you wouldn't think there's much of it. And when you're looking at it from a sponsor point, if someone's going to spend money on you to be good, you really don't want to look bad in their eyes if someone's going to beat you all the time. Well, what's the point of investing money in somebody if they're going to get away with the first 5 minutes? You don't want to do that. So analyzation is everything. I mean, looking at the game, if it's a fighting game, learn the patterns, learn the buttons of how to defend yourself. My logic was a win, which means if I went against somebody like Justin Wong, for example, and I hit him once and blocked the rest of the 2 or 3 rounds, I still won. I mean, it's a little cheesy way to do it, but again, a win is a win. But again, you know, you don't just shuttle into an area like that when you're gearing up for a shooting game, and all of a sudden you're going, hey, well, guess what? We're paying you to host an event, and you're going to do fighting. You know, it's a whole different mindset. Going for a marathon, that too takes a certain kind of skill level. Looking at a game that you're good at, picking out what jumps out at you. Never giving up is another thing. You want to play the game enough times to know when you should walk away and say, okay, I'm really frustrated because there will be times, and I've thrown many Ataris and broke plenty of joysticks and kicked 3 Xbox 360s or whatever. Yeah, patience is a virtue. Knowing the game that you're playing and knowing what your limitations is very essential. And again, if you're going to go for a marathon, you want to see what your limitations are for that. What would someone consider a marathon? Well, there are people who say they've played for 12 hours, 24 hours, 30 hours. And again, knowing the game and how the game responds is a necessity too. Like with Hubert, for example. The man who can play Hubert, you can build up enough men, walk away, go to the bathroom, go down to the block and get something to eat and come back, and you still have 30 or 40 men. Nibbler's the same way. You can, as long as you're keeping track of all the extra men that you have, there are some games that will allow you to marathon them or take breaks in between. Gorf isn't one of them. You know, you get like 3 ships and you're playing, and if you hit something, then you know, it's not really good. So good analyzation of the game is good if you're going to marathon. And of course, knowing your body limits. Me personally, when I played Journey Escape for 80 hours, I didn't drink anything cold. Everything was temperate. I had fruit. You don't want to eat some solid foods, because if you're drinking cold water and having solid foods, that results in one serious problem when you're playing at about 30, 40 hours down the road. And that's basically what I did. I knew my limitations for gaming. I wanted to see how far they could go. Journey Escape was fun, but that music that they played over and over again, I had to turn my TV down. Worm Whomper was pretty much the same way on in television. That green screen with those little inchworms going across. Another game where I had to turn the screen to black and white because that green screen would really eke you out. So again, you want to make the game fun. You want to play something you're going to enjoy, something that people can watch and learn what you're doing. It's easy to stand behind somebody and look at what they're doing, but transitioning to doing exactly what they do is a little difficult. I mean, we all know Brian Koo from the King of Kong. He stood behind me, was watching me play Super Pac-Man. And I thought to myself, well, he's a pretty inept gamer. I mean, he can pick up rather quickly. Do I really want to share my tips and secrets with him, knowing that he'll take them and further his game and possibly beat my high score? I mean, realistically, I really wouldn't care. But when someone's standing right over your shoulder looking, and they're looking exactly what you're doing, you think to yourself, wait a minute, it took me how much money to get to where I'm at, and how many hours of playing the game to develop perfect pattern or strategy. Because you watch people do the maze and the ghosts are going their own different direction. It looks pretty simple, but grouping ghosts or knowing what patterns they follow and knowing what patterns work, what patterns don't work, makes a huge difference in gaming, especially if you're trying to impress somebody like a date. I remember years ago going to the game room, and there was nothing worse than someone slapping tokens on the game. I mean, you're sitting there going, okay, dude, are you trying to ruin my concentration here? And they would do that. They would slap the token down, and then they'd tap their foot and look over at you like, come on, dude, on your game, I got my date here, I want to impress her. And you're thinking, really? You're going to last 5 minutes, and I'm going to be here all day. So I would do that intentionally to be malicious sometimes. I don't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing, but to make someone wait and then retract his tokens off the game, cycle through the arcade, come back, slap his tokens down, and you're on the same man, I mean, that was pretty fun. I mean, it was, because you knew that the guy there was trying to press probably wasn't going to be on the game more than 5 minutes. So yeah, good analyzations, everything. That was on Gyrus, by the way, and it was at an arcade back in Chicago called Haunted Trails. I used to frequent that quite a bit. It was one of the arcade locations that were really, really well on getting a lot of games that you'd never see again. They were using it for a test site. So I had a really good correlation between the Activision people and several other companies, because I made a good living in it. I went out there, and the only thing I had to worry about was showing up at the event and playing video games. I mean, it didn't matter who else was there. You were focused on that game because you were being paid to play the game. So there's a lot of questions that will arise out of that. Oh, well, who did you meet in the duration of playing the game? And did you go back and did you have groupies? And I know that was mentioned in the King of Kong. And I'm like, groupies? I mean, I'm sure there were groupies, but in where I was concerned, I wanted to represent the company and represent whatever company I was working for, the best I could. So it was pretty fun. I mean, like when I played against Chuck Norris, for example, I had this friend back in Chicago, his name was Tom, and he thought he was such an authority and everything. So, oh yeah, Chuck Norris is like 6'5" and this and that. And my mom goes, no, he's not. He's like 5'10". He's shorter than my son. And Tom's like, oh, no, I know, he's bigger. And I pull out the Polaroid of me standing next to Chuck Norris, and he got quiet real quick. But, oh yeah, it's not worse than consorting with people who think they're an authority on everything when they go to the game room and they put up a score and you're looking going, really? I mean, here, I don't want to be a braggart, but you're really not doing all that great. But yeah, it was challenging. Trying to learn the new games that came out, and there was a period of time where there were so many games that came out, it was difficult to actually keep up and current with everything. I remember when Nintendo had released, I don't know how many titles, it had to be like 1986. And I'm thinking to myself, well, heck, there was like 40 Activision titles that was good at, and all the Atari games that I played. But now, oh my God, how am I going to keep up with everything? Because you wanted to keep your name fluid and keep current with everything, just so you can make money playing the games or go to the contests and prevail at the contests. I remember one time we were playing Centipede, and it was in a newspaper. This one toy store, American Sales, wanted to promote 3 minutes on the Centipede. And I'm going, okay, well, this will be pretty easy. I played Centipede before. So I had to devise to myself, okay, what am I going to do? Am I going to go out and roll first? And luckily I was last, but I was thinking, God, if I go first, then I have to set the benchmark for everybody else. This is going to be really difficult. I have to really concentrate. And there's a lot of pressure because you think to yourself, well, what if I like die or something happens? Controls are everything too. You can get a game that works wonderful, but the controller, if it's terrible, makes you look bad, and people are thinking they're going to see you play stellar. Like for instance, here's an example. Steve Wiebe going to play the Donkey Kong at the Twist Up in Santa Monica. He had a bad controller, loses a life on the first board. People want to see you play at your best, and of course, if you have a machine or a controller that's not all that great, you don't look good. So here I was at the Centipede contest, and luckily I was picked last, and I knew what benchmark I had to go for because it was like 12,400 points. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, here's a perfect time to show off, but do I want to risk it? Okay, if I do bad on the first 2 lives, which I did, I dumped them really quick to make it look bad. So I only had 1 life left to redeem myself, and I'm thinking, you know, if there's a rogue a bug that comes out of the side or something like that, or a spider that comes down dropping, I'm screwed. I just dumped my game, but in a sense, I won the contest. I think the prize at the time was an Atari 400 computer. So here it is in the paper. You have one guy next to me. He has 2 Atari 2600 cartridges. I think the other guy won a hat or something like that. And here I am with this huge Atari 400 box. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. I mean, I can make a living at this. And it really didn't dawn on me until that point that there were so many different things, different contests I could win. The neighbors would come over. Everybody wanted to see what was the newest system. I mean, I remember I had like I said, the Atari, and one of our neighbors got the Intellivision. And after watching the television, I was like, wow, you want to trade systems for a while? You know, and it was always like that. You know, you always want to up your neighbor and say, hey, I got a Coleco, or I got an Atari 5200. You know, the prices they had back there on those consoles or games was crazy. I remember it was like $30, $35 for the Superman when it came out, and thinking, oh my God, the graphics are going to be good. When you saw it, you're like, oh well, this isn't really what I thought. You know, it's sort of like Outlaw, but a little brushed up. But it was, yet again, it was fun. You know, the developers back then had to make the best out of the game that they could because they were limited with the graphics. So everything was ported into gameplay, which is really, really, really good, because when you're playing it, the last times you're looking back, you're going, I remember that game. I remember playing it and never getting really good at it. Like Spider-Man. I hated Spider-Man for the 2600. I used to write for Joystick magazine, and I remember one of the editors going, you know, you really shouldn't be too harsh on the games you review. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're paying me to review a game. I play the game, and I think it's lousy. I'm going to say it's lousy. I'm not going to say, hey, this is really good, you should go out and buy it, and then have the consumers write you a letter and saying, hey, I just spent $45 on this game, and it's atrocious. Cosmic Swarm was one of those games. I played it. I thought it was totally disastrous. I mean, people talk about the E.T., and I'm like, oh, E.T.'s got nothing on this game. This game's horrible. So I did that. I wrote in the review and said, this game is pretty much horrible. And one of the columnist people reworded my script. I says, wait a minute, you're paying me to do a job. I did it. Why are you going behind me and changing what I had to write? You know, it just didn't make sense. But from a standpoint, I didn't know that a lot of the publishers that gave them games were actually sponsors of the magazine. So of course, they wouldn't want somebody downing their product if they're wanting to push the product. And I didn't care. My logic was, I was a gamer. You wanted me to go to an event, you pay me. You wanted me to review a game, I review it to my best ability, you know. And you don't want to look bad. I mean, you know, if you're out there and you're lollygagging and these sponsors are going, oh, we don't want him coming along. We don't want him giving a bad name. I remember going to Marvin Glass Company. It was a company that produced Wacko. And I thought the cabinet was pretty unique because it was on an angle. And of course, the controls were pretty nice. And I remember going there and playing the game, and the designers taking notes behind me. I'm thinking, is this a good thing or a bad thing? You know, it really made me feel nervous that here I was, they had this grandiose stage, and they were all behind me taking notes. And I played the game. I forget which score I got. It was rather high, and the developer comes over and goes, you know, you adapt rather well. What is your secret? I'm like, there is no secret. You play the game, you read the directions, you see how the game responds, and you know, I'm a gamer. You know, just put something in front of me, and if I like it, I'll do well, and if I don't, I just move on to something I like. You know, and a lot of people, when they play a game, they'll play it and they'll get discouraged. It's like, well, why are you doing this full circle of getting discouraged? Pick something you like and keep playing that what entertains you. You know, like I said, throwing the console or throwing the joysticks. Yeah, because you know, when you're making a left-hand turn, it doesn't go left. There's a problem, and of course, it affects your gameplay if it doesn't respond the way you want it to. And like for instance, Robotron, when you go to the arcade and you're playing years ago, I would tell the arcade owner, hey, you know, your machine isn't working quite right. And they'd say, okay, we'll fix it. And then you go back later in the day and you play it and it's not fixed, and you go on, man, that thing just sucked down on one of my quarters, or maybe $1 or $2 worth, or whatever allowance that you had, or if you were working, then whatever money you had. And it was quite frustrating. So my brother and I, my brother was 5 years older than me, we realized that static shock on a game would work wonders for the gamer, but terrible for the arcade owners. So my brother had this copper rod, and we'd shuffle our feet across the floor, developing static. And we'd tap anything metal on the game, and it would cause it to go in a test mode. So you'd see like a bunch of circles and squares and all, like when you turn the game off and put it back on. Weirdly enough, some of the games would say free play or give you 100 credits. So I saw that and says, well, like Bosconian, hell, you know, why would you want to spend money when you can shock the game early in the morning and be there all day playing for free? So then the arcade owner sort of got hip to it, because I guess some of the workers would see us shuffling our feet and tapping the game with the little copper rod. So they started getting slick, and they carried around water bottles and would spray the floor. It's like, really? You're going to cause mold, but if you want to spray the floor to prevent the static, you know, and that was their way of counter-measuring what we did. But so you had to think to yourself, okay, if that ain't going to work, what game could I play that I can get really good at, so I don't have to rely upon, you know, doing the static shock thing? And of course, you can tell when the owners are walking around, they see you playing, like for me it was Gyrus or Gorf or something like that you can marathon. And they would get really angered because they were losing money. They wanted people to come in and, you know, dump their you know, allowance worth in their game and walk away with billions of dollars. It's a different world. And describing to people what the atmosphere was when you walked into a game room years ago and see all the lights and hear all the sounds, the whole ambiance. I mean, you don't have that these days, but unless you come to an event like this. But, you know, years ago when you'd walk in and you'd rush to see what game was new that you can play, that you can master. Because that's what it was all about, is getting to be one of the first ones to master the game, so you can hear everybody behind you going, oh, I can see that, that's pretty cool. And, you know, I remember when they got TX1, which is a race game. That was really damn cool, because it was a game that had 3 screens. You could sit down and play it instead of standing for hours. And the lines of people that wanted to play the game was enormous. And I just remember to myself going, okay, let me watch what they're doing to get the most points, develop a strategy, because race games, again, are different than fighting games, and, you know, see what patterns they're using and pretty much extrapolate on it. I mean, there were games I again, was not good at, and try learning to play it like somebody else was rather difficult, because, again, trying to play like somebody else doesn't really transition well. I mean, I watched Les Martin, for example, get like 14 million on Super Pac-Man, and to do everything that he does, and again, I watched him play, is impossible, you know, unless you're recording it and doing it over and over and over like he did, you know. So it's a good thing to develop your own strategies. What's comfortable works for you as a gamer. Pick a game that that gravitates towards you, and don't give up. A lot of people will do that. They'll say, oh, you know, I like this game, but I don't know, I can't get very far in it. Well, why not? The only thing holding you back is you know. And so that's where I sat for many years. I just sat there and I would pick out a game, since I was being paid to do that certain thing. You know, I play this, play that, And in the duration of that, you get to meet a lot of people and show the ability. I didn't know of Walter Day years ago. I know a lot of people have asked, oh, you've known Walter for years. I says, no. I says, I submitted a game at the Haunted Trails. And it get to the point where they were submitting so many of the records that they just got tired of submitting them. And that's why I wasn't really prevalent in the first book. So one day I had a computer and I logged on to the internet and put my name in to see where I was, if I was anywhere for Gorf or anything like that. And sure enough, they had a listing for Gorf. And I contacted Walter and I says, hey, you know, you really have to update your database because there's a lot of games here that I had records on that was never really recognized for. And so that got the adrenaline going again about competing and you know, showing my ability or giving tips to people. Because there's people that will stand behind you and they'll say, hey, what do you do like for barnstorming? For the longest time, people would say, well, I don't see how you get a score like you got in the game. And I says, game observation. If you fly through the birds, between the birds, and go all the way to the top, you're minimizing your speed and your time. So with that in mind, the more movement you do, the slower your barnstorming run will be. In about 2001, 2002, there was a game called Infiltrate. And I never played it before. And several of the people that were really luminary in the gaming said, hey, you know, we can't give us 40,000 points. It's frustrating. Play the game and see what you think. So I was like, okay, well, what could be so hard? And I played this game conventionally. And I say conventionally because, again, game observation is everything. There are limitations in games, and there's strategies in games, and then there's game observation. Playing it traditionally, meaning going from point A to point B and shooting everything, you probably won't get past 40,000 points, and they're right to that point. But if you look at the game and say, okay, what exactly is in this game that makes it more entertaining? I thought to myself, okay, well, if I go to the platform and I shoot the robots get to the point where the robot's bullets are going faster than your man's moving. It gets to the point where they're shooting faster than you shoot. So I have to sit there and say, okay, now where can I position myself to where I can shoot a robot before he shoots me? So after looking at the game and experimenting a little bit, I realized, well, wait a minute. If I build men up first and you get a free man every 10,000 points, that you can effectively go from point A to point B, die 4 times along the way, and still have 2 men in reserve. So after doing this, after experimenting many times, I realized that using the same method over and over again, and it's not playing, like I said, it's not playing the game conventionally, because most people wouldn't think of stacking their men up first. They think of just playing the game to see how far they get. Well, when you stack your men, you can go from point A to point B and back to point A again and still have men in reserve to build your men up again. So that's all I did, is I repeated the same cycle over and over again and got 2 million points on the game. So then these guys come back to me and go, hey, how did you do this? I says, well, I'm going to give you the same advice and tip that they gave me. And that's what you heard. Absolutely nothing. And that's what they said. They said, play the game and see what you think. And a lot of companies were like that. They'd say, hey, we got a new game coming out. We want to test it. We want to see what you think. Give us a tip or suggestion. And it got to the point where I was getting 6 games a day. I mean, not just for the manufacturers, but through other parties that weren't really known. And I'd say, well, this is too much like this other game. It looks almost like a clone or a ripoff. I mean, you don't want to be associated with a company who's making something that resembles something else, and then next thing you know, you're being taken to court. I remember working for the Joystick magazine, and they wanted us to review E.T. And I'm going, well, the game can't be that bad to play. After playing it, it was, you know, it was quite a challenge. We came up with, we devised what we call the E.T. cube. It's in the How to Master E.T. book. And my brother had drawn up the cube, but which screen complacentry was which. So when you put the cube together, if you're walking across to the left, you know which screen was going to be next. Instead of falling down in that little hole, which many people do as a guy was walking, you know, if you walk to the left, you know to stop right away and then move up instead of falling through the opening ahead. So in the duration of reviewing this game, the people from Consumer Guide Limited are like, okay, well, we can't publish your name because we didn't get license rights from the people who made the movie. I'm like, oh, this ain't good. You know, I don't want to be stuck in the bandwagon here for reviewing something. You're going to put my name on it. So again, you have to be very careful about who you're doing business with or what kind of contracts that they're doing for you. I was lucky. I had an agent that would set things up. They would negotiate between different companies. Like for Activision, they would pay me $1,000 a day to go there and play the game. Absolutely. If the Consumer Electronics Show was 4 days, you made $4,000. So, and they would pay for the hotel, the limo, the food. Like I said, the only thing I had to worry about was showing up. And that was a little bit of a problem. At a recent event, I think it was 2006, they had the Kings of Video Games. They had Justin Wong, Triforce, Billy Mitchell, myself, and Fatality. And they had the title it Kings of Gaming. And I noticed on Fatality's webpage they had listed the first paid pro gamer. And I'm going, wait a minute, how is he the first paid pro gamer? Unless he was in diapers, I says, I started in 1980. When was Fatality born, you know? So I contacted the Fatality camp and said, hey, you got to change your verbiage because, you know, I don't want to feel like we're overlapping here. And it turned out to be a rather good event. I told the involved parties that nobody in the collective would have been infringing on the other one, because I know Justin Wong's a fighting champion, Billy Mitchell does the maze, and Triforce does the Tetris, and I do everything else. So yeah, it was fun. And then, like I said, years ago, when you had like neighbors coming over, when you had the Atari, I remember specific times where I wanted to make a belt or a championship, because at that time they didn't have anything realistically that was, you know, recognizing for your gaming ability. And I remember making these dummy championship belts out of paper plates. And the neighbors would come over, they play, and if they made a high score in a game, I'd give them the paper plate that looked like a WWE belt or something like that. Then the next week we'd come over and play the same game, and if you beat your neighbor, then you'd have the paper plate. So like I said, it was fun, but then when I had the opportunity to make a living on it, it was even better because you had a chance to reflect with the organizations that you were working with. Again, analyzation's everything. Like here, when you play a game at an event that has people that are really good at it, I want to say like a Brian Koo, standing behind somebody watching their gameplay, especially if it's something that you're wanting to learn to play. Taking notes is everything. Timing is everything. I was playing the Super Pac-Man a little while ago, and I realized that when I played it, I had to cross my hands. You know, I had to control the it wasn't a dedicated Super Pac-Man cabinet. It was actually one that had many games on it. So, of course, the control that's comfortable for me is I use my right hand to control the direction and the left hand to control the button. But again, navigating through the maze, sometimes when you're playing a game, you actually have to turn before you get to the hallway or the angle, because other than that, you're going right past your exit, and you go, wait, it should have went down. Why did it not go down? I went to the right. What happened here? And knowing the game and what its limitations are is definitely essential. And you go to an event like at a fun spot, and when you see all these different people like we're in the King of Kong or chasing ghosts, learning what they do and learning the patience it takes to get to where they're at, if there's a game that you're wanting to be good at. Taking notes, asking the people questions. I know a lot of people ask a lot of the same questions, never feel that, okay, I'm going to ask them the same question, or whoever it is, and oh, they're not going to answer, they're going to be pretty crass or something like that. I'm always open for suggestions or questions from people to up their game. When I was playing Dragster at the Emerald City Comic-Con, I sat there and I said, I can walk anybody below 6 seconds. I start them off doing a specific pattern first, and I walk them down with a series of instructions. You're going to develop your own pattern on how to shift. Nobody's pattern is the same. And if you got to start out somewhere. So I say, if you get a score any time whatsoever, it's a score. And you'll say for instance, you play it for the first time and you get 15 seconds. Okay, well, it's not all that great, but it gives you a starting point to say, okay, I'm at 15 seconds, let's see if I can better that. What's the next progression? Got to get it down to 11 seconds, 10 seconds, and so on. And by doing so, it gives you a lot more, I don't want to say respectability, but confidence that you're achieving something. I remember years ago I had this brochure that had scores written down, And I remember telling somebody, hey, look, they go, what's your high score on Crockpots on the Atari 2600? I go, I don't know, like 100,000. I knew I had 1 million, but I didn't want to tell them I had 1 million. And the enthusiasm of watching the person playing, getting close to 100,000, was really encouraging to watch, because if I would have told them straight off the bat my score was a lot higher, they probably wouldn't have tried to play the game as actively as what they did. Well, in doing so, after playing the game, they established themselves as getting a remotely respectable score. And this applies with everything. You play a game and you look at the next guy next to you and you're going, I ain't nowhere near as good as they are. But you have to have a succession point of playing the game, whatever game you choose, to get to the point you want to be. You know, failure is obviously there all around you. You know, everybody plays a game, they're going to lose a life, they're going to get killed. Games are programmed for that reason. Whatever game it is, you're going to lose to a certain point until you figure out what makes it tick, if it's actually a game that you're really wanting to play, or is it just something you want to play to show off to people. So analyzation, again, is everything, and having a supportive group of people around you too, because who wants to play a game with no recognition, you know? When you have a large group of people behind you rooting you on, or just even watching, you know, that gives you a lot of adrenaline, you know, sort of looking behind you. I mean, I really hated doing that, because more people that were watching me would make me nervous, and then I'd make more mistakes. This way you want to focus in on what you're doing while they were watching. Maze games were relatively easy. When you're looking at how games were set up, not every maze game is the same, obviously, but you have to figure out what is the best way to get the most points. Everybody wants to see where the game's limitations are, if it's all nines, or the game rolls, or how long you could play a game for. A lot of games years ago weren't geared up for longevity. They have a certain kind of memory. You play it and all of a sudden you're going, wait a minute, how come this game is responding the way it's doing, like with the Pac-Man, the perfect Pac-Man board, where half the board is a maze and half the board is scrambled. I can only imagine when the first perfect Pac-Man happened, what that person was thinking, like, wait a minute, where did this come from? I want to play the game. I want to keep playing the game. And that again too was a little frustrating years ago, because you'd have the games that you buy in the stores. You can't wait till it comes out. You saved your money, $40 for the game, and you buy it and you're going, oh, what a flop this is. I got all the way to the end, now what? What do I do now? And then you have to wait another 6 months for them to come out with another game that's sort of challenging, or maybe not so challenging. I know a lot of online games now is a lot of geared around money. I look at myself and go, well, years ago I would say I will never dump the kind of cash into a game. How many people in here put money into a game? You know, you look and say, okay, if I'm buying a game, like say for instance on an Xbox 360, you buy it, you know what the game is capable of. But when you start delving into games where the more money you spend revolves around your character. Like for instance, I play a game called Conquer Online. I got roughly $7,000 of real money in that game. And you might think, wow, that's a lot of freaking money. But you have to think to yourself, is it the enjoyment factor? I cannot think of how many games I've played that really keep drawing me back. I play that game now and I sit there and say, well, is it really fun to play when you're playing a game and you're only as good as how much you spend? I play Star Trek Online. I find that really nice. Again, I try to diverse myself into things that keep your mind fluid and games that are active. The Conquer Online, again, every time you think you're right at the premises of maxing out everything that they came up with, they come up with another icon or another sword or another shield, and you're going, wait a minute, now I got to spend another how much money to add on to this? Where years ago you spent $40, you had the complete game and you didn't have to worry about having to keep spending money. And now you're looking going, oh my God, I got to keep a mental note of, let's see, how many weeks in a row that I just tank into this game and I'm still dying. I quit the game for a year and a half. It was frustrating. I looked and says, wait a minute. And the funny thing was I created an account on a European server, and I didn't know, everybody on their begs, I want this, can you give me that, can you loan me this? When someone, and you don't think that, people are gonna be like, steal it from you, but they do. And when you loan your stuff out and someone doesn't give it back, and you're going, hey, wait a minute, that sword cost me $250 real dollars, and you didn't give it back to me. Now you sold it and traded it for something else, and you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, I got to spend another $250 to get something like that back equivalent. That's crazy. So there's a little bit of frustration with games like that. I mean, you know, from the good side is you look good, you feel good when you have the character built up for all the money you spent and all the time you invested into learning the game. Because it's not just, okay, A, B, up, down, left, or whatever. I mean, here you actually have to know what weapon to use, what skill power, like World of Warcraft, you know, it's a very involving game. They have teams of people that go out there and develop the game for consumers like ourselves to be entertained. So, you know, the gaming is a huge business. So looking at it on a competitive level, you have to sit there and say, okay, if I've dumped this kind of money into a game, what am I reaping back from it? Can I make money back on it? If there's a contest, will my character be as good as the next person? I noticed that like with Fatality. If you have a good computer and someone is playing against you doesn't have the same good computer you have, you're not going to play as good as they are. Obviously, the processor's not going to process your gaming speed. You're going to have lag. I mean, games like Atari years ago, like when I said, if I go to an event, like for instance, Decathlon, and I offer $1,000 to anybody who gets below 10 seconds, I know that that game is going to play the same for everybody. Whereas nowadays, you play like an online game, you're hoping to God when you have a good controller, your character's set up properly, and if the online thing is working. If it's not, it reflects your gameplay enormously. People don't realize that, and they say, oh, how come you don't play this game, or how come you don't play that game? Well, I really haven't gotten around to it, or it wasn't a game I gravitated towards. Well, like the Madden football or the baseball, MLB, you know, I don't play sports games, or I don't play a lot of sports games, and people always ask that question, hey, have you played Madden? No. Well, you should play Madden. Well, why? What incentive do I have? It's not something I'm leaning towards. If there was something I liked about it, or something I thought that was enjoyable, not saying the game is boring or not enjoyable, I just don't play sports games, never did. Shooting games, on the other hand, I like shooting games. And this Conquer, though, I mean, it's just, unless you played it, you won't understand, or you might understand if you played other games that are online that you end up spending a lot of money on. I quit that game and I started playing a game called Wizard 101. And I played it for the simple fact of I was able to interact with all people begging and stealing from me. Constantly, I hated the begging. Oh, can I have this? They act like you owe them something. I don't know who I'm speaking to online. There's no picture there. I have no idea. But yet they're asking me, hey, do you have gold? Hey, do you have credits? It's like, why are you asking me this? How many other people have you asked this to? So I tried to gear away from that for a short period of time. And I played Wizard 101 for, I don't know, a year and a half to really know the game. And this all boils down to, again, learning game, the way the game evolves, different add-ons on the games, keeping your attention span. Because no one likes playing a game like a Diablo 3 or something like that. Getting to the end and saying, is that it? You know, I spent how much money, I spent how many hours, and now I'm done. Now what? Now I gotta wait 6 months for another game to come out, and you're waiting, like with Twisted Metal. You know, you wait the big build up, you get it, and you're going, oh, this isn't really what I thought it was gonna be. You know, some games though evolve around with the consumer, and again, Wizard 101 was a favorite of mine because I was able to see the three-dimensional view. There was a lot of things implemented in the game that were shying from people having vulgarities. Nobody wants to be cut down when they're playing a game. I mean, it just takes the fun away, especially when they're being rude. And a lot of manufacturers nowadays are trying to improvise ways of having little things in there that would deter from that. But the comparative between the two is, you have one that's like an overhead view, like a Zelda type, and the other one's more of a street level view where you're actually able to see the person, type with them. If you have headphones on, it's more of a realistic point of playing. I like that about Star Trek too. The Star Trek, you actually felt like you were flying a ship and killing Klingons. It was really, really cool. And the evolution, I mean, you go from years ago looking at how games were so simplistic and how games morph into like Ultima. You look back at the saga of how it developed, and you think to yourself, well, Again, how do these game companies know what to come out with that's going to be hit and what's not? I mean, we the consumer are the ones that are changing how gaming companies perceive what we want. And if people don't speak up and say, hey, I want this kind of game or that kind of game, they'll just make what they think is good. And that was the problem I had working for Joystick Magazine. I could tell them, hey, as long as you're pointing people in a direction you want them to be pointed in, they're not going to be happy if they're not going to really enjoy what they're playing. You know, and some companies were open for suggestions to that. I mean, Activision was a great company to work for, and they opened up a lot of opportunities. And of course, they took a lot of consumers' suggestions towards games, which was really good. And then when Activision did the split up, a lot of the people that worked for Activision developed their own companies. And again, it was this constant fluid movement of working with different companies. I just happened to be in a unique position because a lot of the people I work with wanted my interaction and ideas on the games. And I says, well, if you put a game out there that's not going to, like Test Drive, for example, you put a static game out there and it doesn't progress, what then? People always want to see, like for instance, if I'm playing a game and I want to reach into a box and I can't reach in a box because you hit the wall, it just doesn't allow you to do something. That's totally frustrating. I think if they're going to come up with games that are three-dimensional like that they have these different worlds and creatures and stuff, you'd want to have a little more involvement with interactivity with whatever character you're doing. There's nothing worse than walking up to a door and not being able to open up a door and look what's behind the door. They have a door there, then why can't I access it? You know, it's frustrating. But things evolve, and that's what I look for in a game. I says, well, if I'm going to play a game, I want to enjoy the game. I want to see what my peers enjoy doing. And when you go to an event like this and you play a lot of the classics, you get to see how people gravitate towards games. The enthusiasm is still there. It's just not as prevalent because a lot of the arcades from years ago closed down. And it's unfortunate that things happen the way they did. But see, the thing was that they had to compete with the home market. When the home market opened up, people could sit at home for hours on end and play the games that they wanted. Where when you went to an arcade, you know that you had to make the most of your buck at that location. No arcade owner is going to say, hey, I want to make a record. Can you stay open for 4 days straight? Really? They're going to have to pay the employee, they have to pay the electric bill, whatever the heck it was, if they want to keep all the games on. And most arcade owners were not willing to do that. But it was fun. Even so, if you met somebody that was willing to do that. Aladdin's Castle was not one of them. And being so good at games when you were being paid years ago, you had companies like Toys R Us or KB Toys. Once they found out who you were, they'd say, hey, wait a minute, you're that guy that represented such and such company. Oh, hey, can we like pay you not to enter? Because they knew there was a greater percentage of the games that were out back then that I probably would have taken first place and take the prize. I cannot tell you how many times that happened. I'd walk in and I'd say, God, I hope I don't get recognized. You know, oh, they're going to find out who I am and they're going to try to wheel a deal, and I want the prize. You know, and it was really hard to work with that because you tend to pigeonhole yourself. They would see you and say, So that was quite fun. I mean, you just had to look at what was being offered and say if it was relevant or not. I remember when the Atlantis game came out and they offered $10,000 for that prize. I was like, wow, how can I work about this? Because a lot of times when you work for software companies, like for instance, I was working for another verification company when the 2K Sports came out for the million point, the baseball game. I'm thinking, well, even if I quit the company, under contract, I think there was a certain kind of lag time. It totally overlapped. I couldn't win $1 million. Obviously, I was really distraught about that because of the contractual binding. So you have to think to yourself, if you're going to be employed by a company, is what they're paying you enough or equal value to the prize? That was always my objective. Playing the game because I liked it, and getting paid for it was just icing on the cake. That was the whole enthusiasm. Any questions?
You said you played Chuck Norris. What did you play? What game did you two play?
Chuck Norris had his own game called Chuck Norris Super Kicks. That came out in 1983, and a lot of companies, they thought that if they had a celebrity, they thought that the game would probably make more money. So you had, like for instance, you had like Star Wars, you had the Darth Vader would show up. It wasn't really the Darth Vader from the movies, but you had the illusion of, well, I'm standing next to Darth Vader here and I'm playing The Empire Strikes Back, you know. But yeah, a lot of the companies back then, they would pick a celebrity like Boomer Esiason or Mike Tyson and say, here, we're going to make a game around you. We're going to see how well it goes. And since you're the big topic right now, we'll develop a game. And strangely enough, when they did that, they would hire me to say, hey, we want someone who's good at a video game. We'll pay you this amount of money. And you got to go, all you got to do is worry about showing up to the event. And when I did that, like I said, some celebrities were very apprehensive about playing against me because of the fact of I played video games. They're there just to smile and endorse a product because the company wanted to make money off their image. But it was fun. I can't remember a better time, I mean, like I said, looking on Michael Jordan's face or Bruce Jenner. I mean, as nice as they were, you know, they had to be thinking, God, yeah, you know. I mean, I would too if I was, you know, at an event and someone just smoked me like that. I'd be like, okay, did I just get lagged here or what? And there have been times. I remember at one event, who was it? I think it was Dwayne Richard. Yeah, we were at an event, I think it was Classic Gaming Expo, and Billy Mitchell thought it was humorous to change the settings on Robotron, and he put them on real easy, free man, really frequent, and Donald Hayes played the game. He says, okay, we're going to put up a score relatively high, and then when Dwayne comes back, we're going to bump it up to the hardest level. And here Dwayne comes, he's playing, and Dwayne's the kind of guy where he'll go to an event, and a lot of times he's relying upon winning the event so he can, you know, fulfill his winnings, which is good. So he's playing, and he ended up beating Donald Hayes' scores, but the thing is that the prize was offered the day beforehand. So he didn't know that, and he thinks he's playing, he thinks he's going to get a prize, and then we're filming it, or they're filming it. I happen to walk off. And then you hear the letdown. Oh, well, Dwayne, we rigged the game, and the prize was offered yesterday, and you didn't win nothing. It's like, oh, I'd be pretty frustrated. I'd be wanting to kick somebody's butt for sure, you know. I mean, you're sitting there thinking you're gonna, the lure, you know, and then, oh, yeah, and it win anything. I noticed that a lot of times when I'm gonna run a contest, for instance, I'll do the Crazy Taxi. When you make a simple score, I mean, I don't know what simple would be. I just put any score up there. And a lot of times people come up, they'll want to gravitate towards the game, they'll want to play the game, and they'll look, and they're playing, and you see the score that's like written down for whatever the beginning score was. I noticed that if I put up a score that's mediocre or something mediocre, because I've been playing it a long time, so something for me mediocre might be hard for somebody else to attain if they don't know what they're doing. I put the score up there, and I watch many people walk up, they play it, and look at the score and walk away disgusted. So I says, okay, well, why don't I have the public go against each other? And then this way they can leapfrog, and it gives them a better sense of progression, because, you know, whatever score you might make might not be the same as the next guy. What you're making, he might not be able to make. He might look at you like, damn, how the hell did you do that? And then somebody else will come along, and then he bumps your score, and you're like, wait a minute, how is he doing what he's doing? So I've looked at how this is done, and most of the time when I run that contest, I have the public go against each other, and then I'll go in and go against the public blindfolded and deaf. I think the next event, next week I'm going to the AMA Mid-Atlantic. I'm going to be playing against the public on the Crazy Taxi the Dreamcast system. Long jump, I'm going to be doing blindfolded, deaf, and with one hand. So I have to adapt to the challenge and say, okay, if people know I'm that good at one game, 9 times out of 10 they're not going to want to play against you. But if you up the ante and say, okay, well, how about if I do this? Would you play against me then? And most of the time they do. Dragster, I have to hear it. I don't have to look at the screen, but as long as I can hear how I'm shifting, you know, I say, hey, let's go play doubles, and you play, and I won't look at the screen. You know, if you beat me, I'll give you $100. You know, people are like, wow, that's easy money. But again, you know, listening to my RPMs and knowing how I shift, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to collect it. I mean, there are people out there that are that good. David Yancey's one of them. I mean, he's a phenomenal gamer. I would never offer that challenge to him because I know that I would have to give him $100 really quickly. I offered that at the E3 show. you know, for $100. And everybody knows how big an E3 is. And I didn't pay out nothing. I went against the public, blindfolded, took on everybody that went in front of me. I also did the crazy taxi jump there too, but I did it blindfolded. Everything's button configuration with that. When you're looking at the screen, you have to think to yourself, what is the best way and easiest way to play this game? So when you're looking and you have to establish the perfect button configuration for your jump, that's reflective of how far you're going to be. You can see when you're doing I think I did an interview on a TV channel, and I'm looking straight at the game, and I knew my game wasn't going to be all that great. And I told the guys, this is horrible. But again, you have to keep in mind what your horrible is may not be horrible for somebody else. You don't want to discourage nobody. I say, oh, that game sucks, and they're like, hey, wait a minute, that's more than I've ever gotten. Well, again, consistency is everything. Having the need and the want to play that game. What drives you to it, and what could make your game up that much better? Ask a lot of questions. When you're at an event and you're watching somebody playing, I would like to say that most gamers or most professional gamers will want to open up and talk to you about what it took to get to that point of playing that game. I personally wouldn't shy away from answering anybody. Brian Ku's an exception. He's a very inept person. He'll stand behind you and watch what you're doing, and I didn't want to give my secrets to him. Sorry to say, you know, he's an all right guy to a point, but you know, I'm not gonna just hand him my secrets, so to speak. People can watch. Okay. Yeah, just like I said, when you're playing a game, keep focused and be deliberate about what you're doing, and never be afraid to ask questions. That's how you learn. Learning from other people, sharing tips and tricks and how to get better. Any more questions before we close the panel? I hope everybody had a great time. Thank you.